Hello and welcome. Today we're taking a look at the Generation 2 556 AK magazine from AC Unity. Now, if you want just the substance compared to the Generation 1, there are some stylizing changes, and they beefed up the polymer just a little bit. It's a little bit thicker and it doesn't feel quite as flimsy. Fitment wise, it basically fit the exact same way in my Z-Pap as well as my barrel, although I wasn't able to shoot it in my barrel because the firing pin broke, but it functioned the exact same as the Generation 1 in both of my Z-Pap rifles. So if the Generation 1 works for you and you're looking for more, and I wouldn't hesitate to buy more of the Gen 2 if that's your deal, especially if you like the bolt cooled open, which it persists. They did not update the metallic material on the locking surfaces to be anything other than the weird alloy that they used, which I'm glad it's metal, but it's not steel. It continues to be that weird zinc, whatever, non-ferrous alloy. And it carries forward the 3 buttons on the floor plate like the original, although it is still a polymer floor plate. Moving to the range, these magazines, it's not uncommon for them to require a little bit of wear in when they're first inserted. A little bit of polymer has to be shaved off of the back of the magazine, and that is this initial process here. The fitment is very similar to the original Generation 1 in that it is fairly tight, but it's not so tight as to be unusable, and it gets better as it wears in. Here, especially after fitting to the M90, the magazine fits very well in the M85. One thing to note, however, was that the last round bolt hole open was inconsistent for me. Obviously it worked fine in my Zastava AKs, but it does feel a little bit squishy. I mean, it fits, but it has that sort of squish that it's not as easy to insert and remove as some other ones. But it's easier in my Zastavas than it was in my barrel. Even though I wasn't able to test it in my barrel, it did fit and feed, although it took a little bit more force than I would have preferred. So let's actually take a look at that. So my barrel here, it does lock in, but it's a little squishy, and it has to compress some polymer. I can feel that it has to do that. It does, but it's a little bit more forced to remove than I would prefer. So for me, I'm spoiled with enough choice for the barrel that I'm not gonna be really using these in my barrel unless I just happen to be at the range and this is the only magazine I've got, and in which case I'll use it and it should be fine. But otherwise, not the first choice for the barrel. Similarly, for the Z-Pap, it wouldn't be my first choice because the metal magazines are 100% the way to go for the Z-Paps. It was the way they were meant to be. It looks the best, it's the most durable, and that's the one to go with. If you're looking for more detail, let's get into the differences and all of the steps that they took along the way to get to this particular magazine, because it wasn't just one-to-one. There were a few more variants in between. So starting with the actual original Generation 1, we have obviously the smaller feed window, but you also have the single locking button on the floor plate of the original. This was relatively quickly done away with, and they moved to the 3-button situation. I call this one kind of a Gen 1.5. They also had the fully polymer clear version of the same, and it looks like they literally just poured clear polymer in the mold because it even has the same mold marks and the same markings. This is the exact same thing, it's just clear. So if that strikes your fancy, then go for it, but I'm not the biggest fan of clear magazines like this. The Beryl clear magazine is the right amount of translucent. This is a little too toyish in my opinion. That brings us to the AK-19 magazine. Honestly, I think that this one is the best 5.56 AK magazine that AC Unity makes. I think it's really solid. I like where the witness holes are. I like the styling. Obviously, it coming from the AK-19 and the AK-12 program, it's not the AC Unity design language, which I appreciate because I think it's better. Regretfully, this one still uses the alloy locking lugs, but this one does use a metal floor plate, which I think is awesome. I much prefer that over the polymer floor plate, and it does not have the bolt hole open tab on the follower, which I think is a good thing. It is personal preference, but I personally think that's the way to go. It's just because it keeps the manual of arms the same between various AKs, because 99% of AK magazines are like that, except the Yugos and the Bosnians. I understand why they did it, but just a personal preference for me. The Generation 2 here keeps their, their design language, changes their window, keeps their alloy, so it's still that weird non-ferrous alloy, which doesn't rust, but it's not as strong as steel, and it does keep the bolt hole open follower. So the way that works is that on the last shot, your bolt locks back on the follower, and when you remove your magazine, your bolt goes home, and so now you can load a fresh mag and you're ready to go. But that, rather than getting the click to tell you you're empty, you actually get a different cycle of the action. Though for me, it was annoyingly inconsistent. I don't know if it was this particular magazine or if it was my M85, but it wasn't always catching the follower the way that it should, so that is something to note. Overall, I think it's a pretty solid improvement over the original Gen 1. They beefed it up a little bit. They made the polymer a little bit thicker, and so it doesn't feel as brittle, and they increased the size of some of the reinforcing ribs, and the window itself, honestly, I could take it or leave it. The only other thing they really changed was they added a lot more branding as far as the markings on it. The original basically only had caliber markings as well as numbering for the window, but the Gen 2 has caliber markings, their own logo, numbering for the windows, Gen 2 on both sides, as well as the AK-101 30 round marking there. Again, I prefer the look and styling of the AK-19 magazine way more. If I'm just gonna buy AC Unity mags, I'm gonna buy this one. But if you had good luck with the Gen 1, then I think stacking more of the Gen 2s, if that's your vibe, then go for it. I haven't heard of anyone having specific issues with these magazines in various other 5.56 AK platforms, but if you have a WBP, a Palmetto, a SAM5, I would love to actually hear how they worked for you. Anyway, that's the AC Unity 5.56 AK Gen 2 magazine. Hopefully this was informative or at least entertaining, and I will see you next time.